Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting contact. Okay, some various overall detail tightening to do today. Firstly, we're going to start with a third aura around the petals of the primary central sunflower. And I've decided to take this cloud back over the edge of the auras in order to move it forward in the composition and make a contrast between this overlapping the water, which is middle ground of the composition, just for some dimensional fun. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, I think he fixes his microphone in a minute. This is an excellent talk. If anyone is listening to this in the background, it is Gabor Mate, Aaron Mate, and Chris Hedges discussing Palestine. Brilliant talks by Gabor and Chris, and a great discussion as well. So, with that, also, oh yeah, and I made up some deep red and burnt umber to start reglazing this side of the tree and start developing some reddish hues in the shadows of that. And some orange. What did I do? Oh yeah, and I'm going to do the ant legs and highlight on the ants' abdomens again with a lighter yellowish orange. So here we go.
Former members of the Israeli Defense Forces, academics, who have called the current situation in Gaza genocide. These are Jewish scholars. You never hear them quoted. What you always hear quoted is, it's a blood libel to even make the comparison. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as Norman Finkelstein has pointed out so beautifully, much of the intention of the Holocaust academia has got nothing to do with trying to change the world's relationship to cruelty and unfairness. It's to establish a sense of Jewish exceptionalism so that we're the perpetual victims and that everything we do is justified, everything that's done to us is an outrage. A case example is Germany, where Germany is often lauded as the country which has taken responsibility for its actions. Unlike, say, Japan, which is still to acknowledge that it prostituted Korean women in the service of the Japanese forces in Korea and China. Well, that's true. Germany has pleaded mea culpa. But what have they learned? Nothing. It's in Germany that it's least dangerous for a Jew to speak about Palestine. Jews are arrested in Germany for calling for justice for the Palestinians. So teaching about the Holocaust teaches nobody anything. And the point is twofold. One is, you cannot teach morality. Morality is a natural human attribute that arises when people's human needs as children are met. Number one. Number two, you can preach about morality in the service of the most nefarious causes. And that's what we're seeing right now. So that, as I'm sure you've heard this statement before, that the Hebrew word for the Holocaust is Shoah. And there's an old saying, there's no business like Shoah business. It's been exploited to the hilt, and I'm somebody whose grandparents died in Auschwitz, who nearly ended up there myself, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of hearing about it. Not because didn't happen, but because what it has been pressed into the service of. Now, I'd like to ask you a question, which is, you mentioned the Warsaw Ghetto, and one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto, Marek Edelman, who survived the war and became a cardiac surgeon or cardiologist and a real fighter for liberty, supported the Solidarity labor movement, always stood for Palestinian rights. Needless to say, when he died, nobody in Israel mentioned a word about it, or very little. But during the Warsaw Ghetto, After that desperate resistance was crushed, the Germans went to the ghetto, burning down all the homes, all the houses, and Jews would jump out of the windows to their death to escape the fires. And the Germans called them parachutists. Utter contempt for these human beings as they went to their death. Now, I've seen the same thing in Israel now. Not just the cruelty, not just the everything you described, but the contempt. Have you seen that anywhere else? You've covered Sarajevo and the Bosnian horrors. You've covered Salvador and the death squads. You've covered the Middle East. What do you make of this incredible contempt? Have you thought about it?
You have to linguistically render people non-human before you kill them.
Yeah.
So this is why the current rhetoric around the Trump administration is so dangerous. It took 4 years of hate-filled speech before you got any Serbs to cross into Bosnia to begin the genocide. And I think when you read the early history of the Nazis' rise to power, from 1933 to 1938 at least, Claudia Kuntz writes about this, Hitler had to back off from going after the Jews, rhetorically. I mean, you had Kristallnacht, you had the brown shirts, and the Nuremberg laws. That's why language is so key. And you're right that but once you linguistically render people, to quote Galance, to be human animals, and once people believe it, then it becomes. And we read about that in the death camps, the way, when they interviewed Lipton's great book on Nazi doctors, they didn't look at them as human. And that was true in every war that I covered. Although you take human beings, and I would say the other thing is that you build this bizarre kind of a world view where evil is embodied in another. And that when you eradicate the other, you've eradicated evil. And that, of course, what it does is actually expand our own propensity for evil. And I think it's interesting, as you know, I graduated from divinity school, but I think in all of the great religious texts, including the Quran, when the prophet writes about jihad, he writes about 3 types of jihad, but the most important jihad is the battle to curb the evil within us. That's why I think Primo Levi is such an important writer. Because Levi argued over and over that that they were bastardizing or missing the true lesson of the Holocaust, in that we can all become Rumkowski, the Jewish collaborator who led the Lodz ghetto. But yes, language is key. And watching the way Trump and his minions use language to describe immigrants, to describe, the radical leftists, we're moving very swiftly in it, and it's not a long step from the linguistic dehumanization to violence.
It's interesting you mentioned Trump, because a couple of days ago in Washington, D.C., I was there for an interview with Al Jazeera, and the person being interviewed right after me was Mary Trump, who's Donald Trump's niece. And it's very interesting. I mean, she's documented the incredible trauma in that family. But she writes something very interesting, which I think is very relevant to what you just said. She said, in her book, The Reckoning, Mary Trump writes, and you gotta get, she comes from the same family. Same family. And she writes, "We are a nation shackled by our cultural imperative to move from the pain of war, mass death, disease, and government-sanctioned barbarity in the name of peace or healing or a return to normal, when all we've really been doing is preserving the unchecked impunity of the powerful to inflict pain again, again, and again." This is Mary Trump.
I want to ask you about despair, because I think for all of us who've spent 7 years in and out of Gaza,
Yeah,
and you were right, I think, in your speech to cite that sense of futility that we all feel,
yeah,
despite all of the energy many of us in this room put in to battling this genocide.
yeah,
I know I find a kind of solace, having been raised in a religious household, that we're not finally judged by what we empirically achieve, but what we strive to achieve.
yeah.
But despair is something you know a lot more about than I do, and I'm sure there's many like me in this room who struggle with it daily.
Well, I feel despair all the time. Not all the time, but frequently. So despair is a perfectly normal emotion. So is hatred, by the way. These are perfectly normal emotions in the face of what we're dealing with right now. But let me read you something that might put it into perspective. This is somebody writing a long time ago, but he might as well be writing about Gaza. He says, "Greed, hatred, and delusion of every kind are unwholesome. Whatever action a greedy, hating, and deluded person heaps up by deeds, words, or thoughts, that is unwholesome. Whatever such a person, overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, and his thoughts controlled by them, inflicts under false pretexts upon another by killing, imprisonment, confiscation of property, false accusations, or expulsion, that is all unwholesome." Who do you think is writing here? It's the Buddha,
Oh wow.
2,500 years ago. And he's talking about expulsion, torture, confiscation of property, false accusation, killing, imprisonment. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago. Why am I saying this? Not to minimize in any way or to dismiss the importance of the present moment, but human beings have been dealing with this for a long time. And what is actually amazing and what is to be celebrated, this is my antidote to despair, such as it is. What is to be celebrated is that in the face of thousands of years of that kind of history, people still love the truth. People still love liberation. People still love freedom. People are still committed to justice. People are still outraged when they see these patterns arise and hours and over again. So in addition to the despair, there's that real humanity that has never been extirpated and never will be. And that's my, for what it's worth, that's my antidote to despair. This is a long-term story, and we can all make a contribution. And I think the response to despair, for God's sakes, do something, however little, however limited, but do it. Because it's the absence of agency, lack of activity, lack of engagement that really engenders despair.
Yeah. Well, all of these protests and these wonderful, courageous students who are our nation's conscience, who set up these encampments, to be honest, I would appear at the edge of Columbia or Princeton. It was my therapy.
Yeah.
Really, quite literally. I owe those students so much, and I admire them so much, and some of them are with us tonight.
Well, should we turn it over to the audience for some questions? Meanwhile, let me read you, this is a night full of readings. This is, Gideon Levy mentioned this recently, but I was aware of this for quite a while. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I went on a podcast with a Hollywood actor and comedian whose name is Mayim Bialik. And Mayim Bialik is one of the most fervent and ignorant and contentious supporters of Zionism you'll ever find. But that never came up in our interview, and I didn't know it about her at the time. Otherwise, frankly, I would not have gone on our program. We just talked about the stuff I usually talk about. Now, Mayim Bialik had a great-great-great-grand-uncle or grandfather called Chaim Nachman Bialik, who wrote a poem called The City of Slaughter. And The City of Slaughter was a poem that described these pogroms, these anti-Jewish massacres in the city of Kishinev in Russia, or I think in what's Ukraine now, in 1905. I'm going to read you the first two stanzas of Mayim Bialik, who's a great supporter of genocide. I'm going to read this poem by her distant antecedent in the Bialik family. It's called The City of Slaughter. And Gideon Levy recently printed this about Gaza. Here's the poem, the beginning of it. Rise and go now to the city of slaughter. Into its courtyard wind your way. There with thine own hand touch, with the eyes of thine hand, and with the eyes of thy head, behold on tree, on stone, on fence, on mural clay, the spattered blood and bright brains of the dead. Proceed to the ruins, the split walls, reach where wider goes the hollow and greater goes the breach. Pass over the shattered earth and attain the broken wall, whose burnt and barren brick, whose charred stones reveal the open mass of wounds that no mending shall ever mend, and no healing ever heal. But this is Bialik writing about Kishinev. My God, he's writing about Gaza. And here's great-great-granddaughter, whoever she is, cheers it on. That's the world that we're living in.
Let's first of all hear it for Chris and Dr. Matei. We would like to take some questions now from the audience, so if you have any questions, please feel free to line up. We have microphones here and here. We'll try to get through as many as we can, so please be mindful of the time you are taking and try to ask your question as soon as possible. So we can start over here with this first question.
Hello. First and foremost, thank you so much, both of you, for speaking with us today. It's an honor to be here. I am Palestinian American, and my voice is shaky because I lived under Israeli occupation and apartheid and witnessed horrific things as a child. Things no child should ever have to witness and see with their own eyes, including watching bombs being dropped on homes, knowing that there's children and families inside of those homes. And so, being a survivor of Israeli occupation and apartheid and coming back to live in the United States, there was a lot of trauma that was stored into my nervous system. And what was left with me was a lot of survivor's guilt, and of course, over the last 5 years, I've spent it doing a lot of healing, and of course, a lot of your work, Dr. Gabor, has been just immensely helpful. And while I've been healing my nervous system, that survivor's guilt remains.
Right.
And so the question is how do we break that generational trauma with our children?
All right, I got it.
Yeah, while continuing to,
Don't go away.
yeah, okay,
Thanks for the question.
sure.
Let me ask you a question. I survived the Holocaust. My grandparents died. Tell me that I'm guilty. Tell me that I'm guilty.
You're guilty.
Do you believe that?
Of course not.
Then why do you believe it about yourself?
That's a good question.
Think about that. Either I'm guilty, in which case we both are,
Yeah.
or neither of us is. But it can't be the fact that you're guilty and I'm not. One or the other.
Mhm.
Which one would you like to choose?
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can take the next question on this side to the left.
Hello, my name's Hassan, over here in the corner. I became a father in November, just after October 2023. Since then, I have seen dead children, starving children, mutilated families, every day while I feed and dress my son, and I feel a lot of hatred. We talked about hatred today. I feel a lot of hatred. But I also, maybe because of some despair, I feel maybe delusional hope. That delusional hope takes the shape of changing geopolitics. I hope for the rise of the global south. I almost feel like it can't be any worse than what we're experiencing now. It can only be better. I feel that they probably have the moral authority on their side. I'd like to get your opinion on how much of this is accurate and how much of it is maybe just, hope. Do you feel that the world from a non-Western-led order would be better?
Yes. The global south endured its own holocausts, which are not acknowledged by the perpetrators. The Herero, the Namakwa, the Armenians, the 1943 Bengal famine, in which 3 million Hindus died.
Do you want to mention what Churchill said about that?
Yes, he said of the beastly people who have a beastly religion.
Yeah,
Winston Churchill was the prime minister at the time.
yeah.
And of course, Native Americans and African Americans have suffered Holocausts. But the West, and Ami Cesari in his book Discourse on Colonialism said the reason the Holocaust resonated in the West is because it was done against white people, what had been done against the coolies in India and Africans and Indians. And the global South, I don't think it's any accident that Yemen, courageous Yemen, has fought, because we forget the mass starvation, the epidemics. There was a siege on Yemen. Of course, the United States is now again bombing Yemen daily. We were bombing Yemen by proxy through Saudi Arabia. They understand very well not only what's happening to the Palestinians, but they understand who we are because of their own experience. And Pankaj Mishra just wrote a very good book, The World After Gaza, I think it's called, right? He's brilliant, brilliant scholar. His book, Age of Anger, is also brilliant. But he makes this point, and I think we are seeing a move, a kind of division that can't be bridged. I've been in the Middle East quite a bit since the genocide began. This will be my third trip to Egypt. I was in the West Bank last summer, Jordan, I've been in Qatar twice doing broadcasting for Al Jazeera, both in Arabic and English. I, I, uh, I do think that we are seeing the rise of the global south assert itself. At the same time, if you haven't figured it out yet, all Trump and all his grifters and yahoos and Christian fascists are doing a pretty good job of imploding the American empire. They're going to take a lot of people down with them, but that's what they're doing. So yes, we are entering a world where the kind of hegemony of both Europe and the United States is no longer enforceable. And I don't know how, after this genocide, you know, any figure from the UK, from Germany, from the United States is going to be able to get up and talk about American virtue or the rule of law, that we've been exposed for who we are.
Okay, second take for ants, and we'll see what I do after that.
Famous quip of Mark
Take two.
Gandhi, who was asked what he thinks of Western civilization, and he said, "I think it would be a good idea."
Okay, thank you. We can go here for our next question, stage right?
I'm not hearing you, sorry.
My name is Nozomi Ikuda, and I'm a retired minister. And it's embarrassing to even say that these days, really. Most of the people I work with are secular or, you know, from a variety of religions. But, and I have a lot of respect for the Kairos Palestine statement, but I really feel like we're in such a crisis. It's maybe time for another Kairos document. And so I'm just putting that out there for people of incredible moral and intellectual leadership like you to maybe ponder that idea. And anyway, thank you both so much for all of your work.
What kind of document?
You can explain it.
Well, back during World War II, the Bonhoeffer and those folks wrote a document about standing up to Hitler as part of their faith. In 1985, South Africa, there was a document about apartheid. 1992, there was one in the US about the invasion of Christopher Columbus. There's also one about Palestine. There's one from the Americas also. But we're in such a fascist moment, I mean, overtly fascist moment, that to me it feels much more like, I mean, I didn't live through the Third Reich. I mean, I was a baby during McCarthy. But it feels to me much more like, you know, Hitler than it does McCarthy. Anyway, I just think we're in a very devastating moment.
This fascist movement uses the veneer of the Christian faith.
Yes.
They're heretics, of course. They're not
Of course.
Christians. Jesus didn't come to make us rich. And you didn't have to suffer through 3 years of Harvard Divinity School as I did to figure that one out. No, I wrote a book, American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War in America, for which I took a lot of heat for. And I think the liberal church failed by not calling these people out for who they were in the name of tolerance, which is a word Martin Luther King never used. It was our job. And we gave them a kind of religious credibility that they should not have. My great mentor at Harvard, James Luther Adams, was at the University of Heidelberg in 1980 when I had him 35 and 36. He dropped out, he joined Niemöller in the underground confessing church, but he, in the 80s, when I was in school, likened these figures to the so-called German Christian church, which was a Nazi creation. And if you look at the ideological roots of, Trump is brainless. I mean, they give him the Sharpie and, they put it in front of him and he signs it. but the people behind them are not. They know very well what they're doing. And if you look at the ideological roots, the two major figures are Rusas Rushdoony, who was a Nazi sympathizer, but the Nazi legalist Carl Schmitt. And once you explore where these people are coming from, these are not tangential relationships with fascists, but they're rooted in fascism. But yes, I think it's incumbent upon those of us who come out of the church. I mean, statements are good, but we really have to begin to assert ourselves because we didn't stand up when we should have.
Hi. I just returned from Gaza 2 weeks ago as a humanitarian worker, and just yesterday, the United Nations humanitarian country team put out the statement of rejecting the plan for Israeli military administered aid. So my question is, what does morality and solidarity look like for these humanitarian organizations or institutions, and what then should regular people like us do who still want to help humans living in Gaza from your perspectives?
I really wonder about that myself, because even an organization like Middle East Children's Alliance, for whom this benefit is being held tonight, if the Israelis really decide that they're going to be the spigot, it's either open or closed for humanitarian aid, food, medicine to get into Gaza, how's anybody going to force it through when the rest of the world allows them to maintain that control? So I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that. When you donate money, and I'm not trying just to discourage anybody, on the contrary, but in this world that we're heading into, how we can even ensure that the pittance that we can put together will even get through? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, clearly they want to use aid as a weapon.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of Mark Edelman's wife, Alina Margolis,
Yeah.
who's also a doctor and a founder of Médecins du Monde. She lived in my apartment when she worked in the refugee camps. She was also in the Warsaw Ghetto. But Mark, and there's a wonderful book by Hannah Kroll called Shielding the Flame, where she interviews Mark about all of these moral dilemmas. And he talks about when you reach a level of starvation, how the Nazis would entice people onto the trains by giving them, I think it was 3 loaves of bread, and I think marmalade. And even though people, I suppose on an intellectual level knew, but if you reduce people to a level of starvation and you wield the sources of food, then food itself becomes a weapon, which is precisely what the Israelis are attempting to do. The militarization of aid is not an Israeli invention, by the way. USAID, let's not sugarcoat what that was very much weaponized in the interests of large corporations in the American empire. But this is just a disastrous move because it will just become another weapon in Israel's arsenal to manipulate and, I fear, push the Palestinians probably into the northern Sinai.
I think we just keep pushing and talking and advocating and donating and have some trust that they can't do everything that they want to do.
Thank you. We can come over here for our next question.
All right, now. How much time we got? Oh, I barely spent any time at all on this clip so far.
Okay, thanks. My name is Edmund Bolella, and I want to thank you both. And it is an honor to be here and to be in the presence of all of you. I'm blessed by being here. And Chris, I want your thoughts you know, as an award-winning journalist, how do we break through the bubble? I mean, and thank you for bringing up auto da fe of the mind in one of your lectures, because there's this cacophony of propaganda and of misinformation, and I look at my colleagues, I'm in social work, and you know, they completely buy what they're told, and I'm not sure I blame them, because if you start with those premises, you're going to get to those conclusions. And I'm not really sure, how do we somehow try to introduce a counter discourse? I mean, I'm taking major heat. I'm considered an anti-Semite for being here. I mean, I mentioned your books, and like people say, I never thought you to be an anti-Semite, and I'm cleaning up the language. So, you know, if I post that I'm here on Facebook, I don't know what'll happen. People's heads will explode. But so your thoughts on how to break through, how do you create a counter discourse?
Well, there is a counter discourse. One of Aaron, I hope you all know Aaron's great work. But of course, the mainstream has made war on it. So you have figures like myself, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald. We were all mainstream, but we were pushed out. We didn't, because we wouldn't sell out. And now these large media platforms, you know, are Meta, and they use all sorts of algorithms, demonetizing every way they can. But I think that the reason of that ferocity is that most people understand, and you even know that from the opinion polls. And Gabor mentioned, you know, the New York Times, several examples. They know they're bankrupt. I mean, look at the you know, the New York Times is now running story after story, you know, in surprise about what's happening, when they spent all of this time demonizing the student movements, all of the protests, and it wasn't, you know, I was angry just because journalistically it was completely untrue. I was at the Columbia, I was at Princeton, you know, they on Friday nights they would put out a tarp, and the Muslims would have their prayers, and they'd have Shabbat on the same tarp. This is the world we want to create. And so they led with this lie and repeated it over and over, which of course became the fertilizer for the attacks that are now taking place. So, you know, all we can do, and there are journalists out there that do it. We were just talking before we came on here about my great friend Robert Fisk. 44 years in the Middle East. His book, The Great War for Civilization, remains, I think, the best book on the modern Middle East. You just have to keep fighting back. Joseph Roth, the great Austrian journalist who saw the Nazis for what they were in the 20s and then was completely banned, blacklisted and driven from the country. He once said, "I feel like a mouse squeaking against an avalanche, but squeak we must." And there are people that will hear it, but you're right. A lot of people won't, because the truth is always hard to hear. But they're out there, and we don't need that many. You know, we just need a few more people like we have here tonight, and we can create a lot of problems for them.
There are a couple of things I want to add. Is we have to be wise to their tricks. Now, for years, this is before October 7th, whenever the New York Times mentioned Hamas, it would de rigueur add, Hamas is an organization that denies the right of Israel to exist. Okay? Now, first of all, that wasn't even quite true. But even insofar as it was, when they mentioned the Likud in this constitution, it's forbidden to think about a non-Jewish state between the river and the sea. They would never say Likud is an organization who denies the right of the Palestinian state to exist. But we just take it for granted. Even now, when they report the number of Palestinian dead, they say, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health. They never say, according to the Trump-run American Ministry of Health or the Likud-run Israeli Ministry of Health. These little tricks that get under our skin without us noticing it. That's the first point. Second point is, I read the biography or the memoirs of Albert Speer. Speer was an interesting character. He was the Hitler's architect and friend, and also his economic master. And he spent 20 years in Spandau jail as a war criminal after the Nuremberg trials. And Speer, whether genuinely or disingenuously, but he writes the following. He said, everybody's asking, what did you know? What did you know? They said, that's the wrong question. He said, the right question is not what did you know, but what you could have known if you wanted to. And he describes two incidents when once he was in one of these factories of Krupp or Tyson, one of these German mega corporations still exist, where they use slave laborers. And he ran into some of these slave laborers and he asked them, would you rather be here or in the camps? And they looked at them with absolute horror. And Speer said, I never asked them why. And he describes another incident where some German Wehrmacht general is talking to Speer, and Speer says, I'd like to go see what's happening in the East sometime. And the general said, whatever you do, don't go to the East. And Speer said, I never asked why. Well, the difference is that there was no alternative media. There was no YouTube, TikTok, there was no Chris Hedges, there was no Ben Greenwald, there was no Matt Taibbi, there was no Aaron Maté, there was no Amy Goodman. There was just the mainstream media. Now there are, at least for now, all these alternative sources. People have a lot less excuse not to know now than they ever did in Nazi Germany.
I know that we can listen to you both speak all night, me personally, but I think we only have time for one more question, so we'll go over here to the left of the stage.
Thank you. My name is Miriam Al-Rashid. I'm an international law lawyer and I work here in Manhattan. Immediately in October of 2023, when after October 7th, right, and thank you. It feels very small to say to both of you for being here. It's more gratitude than anything else. I spoke up immediately. This is my area of law and specialty. In October 2023 in Manhattan, so you can imagine the last 18 months how great that's been in big law. A great deal of fun. What I found most frustrating, I'd like to hear both of your views on this, on how people in the audience and those who are live streaming and hearing this, or anyone else who watches. I traveled to a Gulf state not very long after, less than a year after October 7th. And let's just say, well before that, the genocide had began. It was genocide. And all I got were thank yous. Thank you. Wow. In Manhattan, speaking up. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. You must chapeau all this nonsense. It frustrated me. I wanted to say, don't thank me. Speak up. So I'm curious, knowing, especially Mr. Hedges, what you went through at the New York Times, and the corporate betrayal that happens, how you encourage people to not empower, but for them to feel in, as a verb, in their power, to speak up with others, as more voices means more power, and less of the bullying on the other side. That's where I found it most frustrating. I'd like to hear from both of you how you would advise others who are scared to speak to start mobilizing even more and more, because now is the time to do that.
You know, I'll let Chris answer that in more detail, but I don't encourage anybody to do anything. And I'll tell you why not. They can't fire me. I don't have a job. I can say whatever I want. But I know physicians, universities in Canada, in the US, who've lost their jobs. I can't tell anybody to jeopardize their job. And that's their call. I tell them to follow their conscience, consider their situation. But I'm in no position to tell somebody else who faces punishments and sanctions that I don't face as to what they should do with their lives. Chris and I were talking tonight about a common, very courageous physician friend of ours who's she's being fired, she's been threatened with 10-year suspension. She's a wonderful physician, totally committed, and she's facing the end of her career.
Well, they're threatening, this is Rupa Mara, they're
Yeah.
threatening to revoke her medical license.
That's right. So, the answer is, don't tell people what to do. I don't know how you would answer that one.
I think that's right. I think that, I mean, I have been kind of picked out of one institution after another. But I think it again goes back to the fact that my whole worldview, and I'm not alone in this room,
Yeah.
is grounded in my religious tradition. So
Okay, so
I
that gets
grew up
some of the details
with a
starting to
father
be
who was a
tightened
World
up a
War II
little bit
veteran.
throughout most of the composition. We've got the cloud pushed back in front of the sunflower,
Been in North
the third
Africa,
aura
worked
of the
in
sunflower,
back
the
war
reddishness creeping into the tree on the left, and a little bit more happening with the ant texture and color, as well as fixing the river leading up from the sky ocean of the middle section. And what else did I just do? Oh, the little purple clouds on the left too. Here, let's get this off the tripod.
I think
I'll
this got back to the first
hand around
question. I
it
don't
in a
think
few
we
minutes.
teach morality. I think that because morality, I think, is driven, and again, to your point about intellect, it's driven by empathy. When you read the play by Camus, the doctor talks about a nights of endless defeats, but he can't overcome that empathy. And coming out of a religious tradition, then you understand that these institutions, as the theologian Paul Tillich said, are inherently demonic. And
All right,
they
I'm
will-
starting to
they will
like the
crush
ants a
you.
lot
I mean,
better.
empire
They're starting to get
almost
some
always wins.
danciness
I
to
mean,
them.
that's
It's
what
good.
history shows us. And yet you have these figures. I was in Salvador with Oscar Romero, so my father,
And that tree is starting to look a little more meatish, a little more visceral.
equal rights for the
Which is
GBLT
good.
community, and
And,
instead he organized an Easter
little purple
service
clouds
for the GBLT community in the city
Look
of
better with a little
Syracuse,
shadow under them.
where his church was, and he came and got me, and he
So
said,
I think that's it for the moment. Once again, that is Aaron Mate's intro to Gabor Mate and Chris Hedges' discussion and Q&A about Palestine. Incredible talk on the Chris Hedges Report channel, and I just shared it to my own YouTube channel as well. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's out there. Have a good day, Earth.
And when I was called in